The name was changed. The date was lost. The face was forgotten. The story was rewritten. Also then, around 1280 CE, everything stopped. Within 25 years, the great houses were abandoned. The cliff dwellings went silent. Archaeologists found no mass graves piled in the streets. No evidence of invasion written in wounds on bones. No signs of conquest marked by burned villages or destroyed temples. Just empty rooms with dust settled on the floor, empty fields with weeds growing between the irrigation channels. Empty cities where the wind now walks through doors that no one closes. The accepted story became clear over the next century of archaeology. The Anasazi vanished. They disappeared. They ceased to exist. For over 700 years, this was the official narrative taught in universities, published in scientific journals, written in museum guidebooks, repeated in documentaries. The civilization collapsed. The people died out. The mystery remained unsolved. Visit any museum in the United States showing Southwest archaeology. Read any textbook on Native American history. Browse any documentary about lost civilizations. The Anasazi are described as vanished, lost, gone, a ghost civilization haunting the cliffs, a vanished people whose fate nobody knows, an enigma that archaeology cannot solve. But here is where the story stops being simple, and this is where the old narrative begins to crack. In April 2025, a study published in the journal Nature by the Geology Institute at the University of Copenhagen shattered that entire narrative, not with a theory, not with an argument, but with actual genetic data from human bones. Led by tribal governor Craig Quanchelo of Picuris Pueblo in New Mexico, alongside geneticists Esque Willerslev, Michael Adler, and Thomas Pinotti, researchers analyzed DNA from 16 ancient individuals buried at Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, dating from 900 to 1200 CE, during the peak of Ancestral Puebloan power, compared against 13 living members of Picuris Pueblo today, people who carry their ancestors' DNA in their cells right now. The findings were not subtle. They were not ambiguous. They were not probabilistic estimates open to interpretation. The genetic continuity between ancient ancestral Puebloans and modern Picuris Pueblo was overwhelming, strong, unbroken, statistically impossible to explain as coincidence. A haplogroup is like a surname passed down not in writing but in the body itself, a genetic tag that traces your maternal line back through your mother, her mother's mother, all the way back to the first woman who carried that specific mitochondrial DNA sequence. And the haplogroup found in the ancient remains at Pueblo Bonito specific mitochondrial DNA lineages, particular haplogroups that should have disappeared if the people died out, matched the haplogroup carried by living Picuris Pueblo members today with such precision that researchers could calculate the probability of this being coincidence, less than 1 in 10,000. The bloodline was unbroken for 895 years. The DNA proved something that should have been impossible according to the old story, something that archaeologists had been trying to prove for decades without genetic evidence. The Anasazi never vanished. They never disappeared. They never ceased to exist. They were living 275 kilometers away, in the northern Rio Grande region of northern New Mexico, the entire time they were supposedly gone. Not by years, by centuries. This is the part the records don't explain, the part that colonial narrative never accounted for, the part that oral traditions knew but science refused to believe until DNA finally validated what elders had been saying for generations. The anomaly isn't a genetic mismatch between ancient and modern. It's the false premise itself, the entire framework of disappearance that archaeology built around a people who never disappeared at all. The mystery wasn't that they vanished. The mystery was that scientists believed they vanished at all, that museums wrote vanished civilization on their plaques, that textbooks taught children the Anasazi were ghost people, that the narrative of disappearance became so powerful it erased the reality of survival. The first theory says the Anasazi collapsed from environmental catastrophe, that the land itself killed them. A megadrought struck between 1227 and 1289 CE, a 25-year great drought, the longest and most severe arid period in the southwest during the entire medieval period, which devastated agriculture across the entire region. Tree ring data from living ancient bristlecone pines confirms this period of extreme aridity, with no rainfall records for decades. The drought destroyed crops year after year. The drought killed livestock that required water. The drought forced starvation that weakened entire populations. Archaeologists found evidence of abandoned farms with half-harvested corn still in the fields, abandoned villages with cooking fires still cold in the kivas, abandoned cities where people left their pottery, their tools, their children's toys, everything they owned because they had to walk immediately or die. The theory carries genuine scientific weight from multiple angles. Dendrochronology supports the drought timeline. Paleoclimate data from lake sediments supports the aridity. Soil analysis supports the agricultural collapse. But here's what it fails to explain, and this is the gap that has kept archaeologists uncomfortable for decades. If the drought killed everyone, where did the genetic continuity come from that we see in modern Pueblo people? If the civilization collapsed completely, why do living Pueblo people carry the same mitochondrial DNA as the ancient ruling dynasty buried inside Pueblo Bonito's Room 33?
The drought theory explains the abandonment of Mesa Verde. It explains why people left the cliff dwellings. It doesn't explain the survival of the people themselves, the continuity of the bloodline, the fact that the DNA kept living in human bodies 800 years later.
The second theory is more complicated, more nuanced, and carries more weight from archaeologists who have studied migration patterns. It suggests the Anasazi migrated rather than died, that when the drought hit, when resources depleted below survival levels, when social upheaval intensified around shrinking water sources, the people walked away from their ancestral Puebloans themselves and carried with them like living possessions. The Turkey mitochondrial DNA showed a clear genetic shift that matched human movement. Before 1280, the turkeys in northern Rio Grande had different haplogroups, different genetic lineages. After 1280, they carried Mesa Verde turkey lineages, the exact same genetic markers found in turkeys from the ancestral homeland. The birds moved with the people. The turkeys transplanted with their human owners. This transplanted line of turkeys then replaced those that lived in northern Rio Grande before their arrival, overriding the local turkey population with Mesa Verde genetics. The turkey DNA supports human migration. The oral traditions from Pueblo communities support the migration story. The material culture, pottery styles, architectural techniques, agricultural methods shows continuity between Mesa Verde and northern Rio Grande after 1280. But here's what the migration theory still fails to fully confirm, and this is exactly where the 2025 nature study becomes critical. The exact destination, the specific Pueblo community that carries the lineage. Archaeologists have suggested multiple possibilities over decades. The Hopi in Arizona, the Zuni in western New Mexico, the Tiwa-speaking Pueblo people along the northern Rio Grande. The data points to the northern Rio Grande region broadly, but the specific lineage, the exact community, remained uncertain until the Picuris Pueblo study arrived in 2025. The migration theory explains the movement. It explains the departure. It doesn't explain the precise genetic continuity, the specific bloodline, the exact community until DNA finally pointed to Picuris. The third, and the one most researchers are hesitant to say out loud in scientific publications because it challenges the entire framework of archaeology, suggests something more unsettling about how colonial narratives shape scientific understanding. The data doesn't, was it like Tishan? Lieutenant John Hayes Simpson, a U.S. Army officer conducting a military reconnaissance through the Southwest, published a report describing the abandoned dwellings as the home of a vanished people, a ghost civilization with no living connection to contemporary Native Americans. The Smithsonian Institution repeated this narrative in their publications. For a century, the story of disappearance became official science, taught in universities, written in textbooks, displayed in museums. But researchers are careful to frame this as probability, not certainty, because the data doesn't confirm colonial fabrication directly. The data doesn't show Simpson intentionally lied. The data only fails to rule it out, and the genetic continuity suggests the narrative of disappearance served a purpose. It denied living people legal standing over their ancestors' land and bones. Under NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, if a people vanished, their bones can be studied without consent. If they have living descendants, those descendants must be consulted. The DNA proved they never disappeared. The question is why no one wanted to know, why the narrative of vanishing persisted for 8 centuries when the truth was walking around in living human bodies the entire time. Here is where it gets complicated, and this is where the science stops being abstract and starts being human migrant. Imagine standing in room 33 at Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, winter of 1150 CE, during the peak of ancestral Puebloan power before the drought hit. The temperature outside is 10 degrees below freezing, wind howling through the canyon walls like a living thing. Inside the room, the air smells of dried sage burning in a fire pit, burning juniper wood creating smoke that rises through the ceiling opening, and the earthy scent of pottery clay being shaped by hands you cannot see. You're surrounded by burial packages wrapped in yucca fiber blankets. 42 people buried together in careful rows, men, women, children, infants, the ruling dynasty, the matrilineal line that traced their bloodline through mitochondrial DNA for generations, the people who controlled Chaco Canyon's power. 800 years later, a descendant of that exact bloodline stands in Picuris Pueblo, 90 kilometers north of Santa Fe, carrying the same mitochondrial haplogroup in their cells, the same genetic signature, the same unbroken line that has never changed. The blood never stopped flowing, the line never broke, the people never vanished into nothingness. They walked away, and they continued to disappear into extinction, but it doesn't prove everything archaeologists still need to know. How many other Pueblo communities carry the same mitochondrial lineage? The Hopi in Arizona, hundreds of miles west, the Zuni in western New Mexico, the Tiwa-speaking Pueblo communities along the northern Rio Grande like San Juan, Santa Clara, San Ildefonso. The DNA study focused specifically on Picuris Pueblo. It doesn't rule out multiple descendant communities carrying the same lineage. It doesn't confirm the complete migration path from Mesa Verde through every intermediate village. It doesn't explain why the vanished people narrative persisted for 8 centuries when the truth was living in Pueblo communities all along. when descendants were walking around in the Southwest carrying their ancestors' DNA while museums wrote vanished civilization on their plaques. The data doesn't confirm this colonial narrative fabricated. It only fails to rule it out, and that uncertainty is itself a mystery. Imagine you are given a photograph of your ancestors from 800 years ago, a photograph that shows their faces, their clothing, their home in the cliff dwellings, their children playing in the courtyards. Someone tells you those people died. They disappeared, they ceased to exist, they are gone. But then you take a DNA test, and the test shows you carry their exact genetic signature, their haplogroup, their bloodline in your cells. The photograph wasn't of dead people, it was of your ancestors. The people didn't vanish. They became you. Your DNA is their DNA, your blood is their blood, your existence is their continuation. This is the enlarged mystery that remains unsolved, the mystery that DNA solved for Picuris, but not for all Pueblo communities. The Anasazi didn't vanish, but the story of their vanishing became more powerful than the truth of their survival for 800 years. Why? What does this say about how science narrates indigenous history, about who gets to define whether a people exist or disappear, about how colonial narrative can override oral tradition for centuries? What does it say about the power of a story to erase people even when those people are still alive? The DNA finally solved the 800-year mystery of the vanishing Anasazi for Picuris Pueblo. But the larger mystery remains open. Why did we need the DNA to tell us what the elders already knew? Why did science need genetic proof to believe what living people said for generations? And how many other vanished civilizations are actually still living, carrying their ancestors' DNA, waiting for science to finally listen? A river doesn't disappear when it changes course. It flows somewhere else. The water keeps moving. The Anasazi were that river. They didn't end. They redirected. They flowed into new lands. They became new communities. And now the water keeps flowing through living human bodies, through Picuris Pueblo elders, through their children, through descendants who carry 800 years of unbroken bloodline in every cell. The ancient DNA finally solved the 800-year mystery of the vanishing Anasazi, but the question remains, what other vanishing civilizations are actually still here waiting for us to finally see them?